All right, I tell you what, let's get rolling. Welcome. I'm Mike Erdman with the Home Builders Association of Marion and Polk counties. And of course, we're here today to talk about whether employers can or even should require their workforce to get vaccinated. And of course, everybody is eligible for the vaccine in Oregon starting next week. But as many of you know, construction workers and a lot of others in the industry are actually eligible to get vaccinated now because they meet the CDC definition of a frontline worker. So we've had a number of questions here in the office from our employers asking, can I require that of my workforce? And so we know it's a question that many of you may be asking and wrestling with yourself. And so what we wanted to do today is bring in HR experts to talk about that. And so we're excited to have BBSI with us today. The Home Builders Association has a partnership with BBSI. They bring a lot of expertise to the table. And so I'm going to introduce Eric Nelson. He is area manager with BBSI, and he'll introduce his team and they'll take it from here. So Eric, welcome.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike. We're super happy to be participating with the HBA and have an ongoing partnership. And we hope that not only through our work one-on-one with clients, but also through webinars like this, that we're able to help our community be even better. Before I introduce the team, I just want to frame a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today, which Mike did a great job of outlining. Again, we're going to be talking about mandatory vaccinations. Should I have a policy like that in place, or should I do something different at all? Is that a good idea? We're going to be talking about remote work considerations, thinking about the workforce. And I know that many members of the HBA, your workforce has been out in the field working, but you may also have those in the office who have been working remotely at least part of the time. So we're going to be talking about those things as well. Also, there's some leave issues that might come up with COVID or vaccinations, and we talk about those as well. And then, when we think about it, we're going to be talking about from the perspective of what's the least vulnerability or exposure that I might have as a business owner. Thinking about if I had a fully vaccinated workforce, I'm probably going to have the least amount of issues of employees needing to be away from the workforce to what probably has been in place for the last over a year. There are no vaccines in that myriad of employees within that scope and scheme of your workforce. And we know that most of you have had employees working for a while, and we've been working with dozens of members of the HBA and their organizations and trying to help them manage through the last year of a pandemic. So with that, I'm going to let my team introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into the material. Molly, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Eric. So my name is Molly Hitchin. I'm an HR consultant here in Salem with BBSI. I started my career in retail, so I've got experience with retail staff. And since then, I've transitioned into healthcare and working with many other industries. I love employee relations. Anything you've got going on in the workplace isn't going to scare me. I'd love to hear about it. And Tim, go right ahead.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Tim Nortz with BBSI. I'm also an HR consultant with the group. Been with BBSI a couple of years, but have about 15 years experience in business and HR consulting. Worked as an HR leader for a larger company in Portland for over 10 years before moving down closer into the Valley. Proud papa of a 2.5-year-old. And so like everybody else, kind of remaining dynamic and flexible during these times. And yeah, excited to share some of this info with you guys. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Molly and Tim. And again, as Mike introduced, I am Eric Nelson. I have the fortunate opportunity to lead BBSI for the Willamette Valley. We have offices in Salem and Albany, so we cover all the counties of the Marion Polk HBA organization, as well as other surrounding counties also. And I've been fortunate enough to have some wonderful companies I worked for prior to coming to BBSI. But I tell you, from the bottom of my heart, this is the most meaningful work that I've had an opportunity to be participating in a really long time, because we truly get to make a difference with the community that we live and work in. And as I tell people lots of times, I've worked for some very large companies and their stock never went down when I left those companies. But I know today the impact that we have really does affect the bottom line of the companies that we work with. And so very excited to be presenting today. So a little bit about who BBSI is. BBSI really focuses on people management. Right? Think about everything that you need to do to lead your organization from an HR perspective, from a safety and risk perspective, from business consulting skills. And we're really focused on like making sure that you have the right people, you have the right processes in place that are going to drive prosperity for your organization. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Basically, as Tim and Molly had shared, they're both HR consultants. What you get when you work with BBSI is that you have a team of 4 people who are working directly with you. You have all their cell phone numbers. They have a personal relationship with you. They go to the same grocery stores. You see them at the restaurants. They actually, use our HBA members to help them with their homes. And so you get a dedicated business partner, payroll analyst, HR consultant, and risk and safety consultant. And everyone on our team has, much like the expertise that Tim and Molly have shared, that same level of deep expertise in what they do. So that's enough about us. I want to transition into like the subject for today. And as a reminder, and this applies to basically every presentation that you'll ever see from a law firm or from a consulting firm, is that you're going to get some very helpful information today, but you want to make sure that you consult with an advisor of some sort prior to making any decisions and saying, I'm basing it all on what I heard today. So whether that's BBSI or an attorney or someone else who can help you in your situation, you really need to get that advice prior to making broad decisions that could impact your organization. All right, so mandating vaccinations. We talked about that, hey, we're going to start from this perspective of what if everyone in my organization was vaccinated? I just required that as a business owner. And, as Mike said in the introduction to this presentation, yep, you can require it. That's something that you can mandate as a business owner. And there's a couple things about that. So one, a lot of times when you're talking about medical conditions or conversations around someone's own medical issue, you're worried about HIPAA violations or things that might be protected under the ADA. By requesting or asking employees if they're being vaccinated is not an intrusion on any law of sorts, right? So you're not trying to find out a diagnosis about a medical situation. You're not trying to understand what they can or can't do. You're simply asking, hey, I want you to be vaccinated, or have you been vaccinated, right? And show me some proof of it. None of those are inquiries that would invoke any type of employment law. So that's first and foremost. Yep, you can do it, but should you? That's will be the follow-up questions that we'll have later. But and there's 2 reasons really why people can choose to abstain from that. One is that they have a disability-related reason for declining the vaccination, right? So they have some type of medical condition that could preclude them from needing to be vaccinated or able to be vaccinated. And part of that process then is going through a process of determining if reasonable accommodation is allowable within your organization. That's one way that you can move down that path. The other is around religious beliefs. Some people may have religious beliefs or strongly held value that's tied to religion that precludes them from being vaccinated. Those are really the 2 major points of why someone could choose to opt out of a mandated program. Now, there are some other things that may come into play. Molly, do you have any insight into some other things that might come into play in that aspect?
Yeah, so what's interesting, and I think one of the main reasons there's confusion on if you can require employees to get the vaccine or if you can't, is because in Oregon specifically, there's a law that was passed in 1989 that actually exempts medical professionals and a lot of frontline staff from mandatory vaccine policies, which I know that may sound surprising. Healthcare workers are exempt from this. That sounds very interesting, but Oregon passed a law in 1989. And I think that sometimes when employees say, well, no, they can't make me get vaccinated, other employees hear that. They think that that's also true for them, when really the person saying that could have been a nurse, a provider, a lab technician, someone who works for the fire department, the police department. So that's where sometimes we get that confusion. When you hear people adamantly saying, no, I can't be made to get the vaccine, well, they actually may fall under that law that Oregon passed in 1989. So that's partly why there's some confusion out there.
Awesome. Yeah, and and part of this whole process is like a lot of this is new to all of us, because the flu vaccine's been around for a while, but people generally who are maybe older or in certain healthcare conditions would actively get that every year. But a lot of the workforce, who's the healthy working workforce, may not have, right? And now we're in a different situation where the government is really pushing for everyone to be vaccinated in the US, or is us to get to a level of herd immunity. And so there's a lot different pressures that are impacting us as business owners and as just members of the community today. So let's take a look at like what it means when you have people who are unvaccinated and vaccinated employees, and what you can do with those who are unvaccinated, making sure that you have a workforce where people are being treated somewhat equitably, right? So part of it is that and this will happen a lot of times in the workforce without being really visible to you, is that people start being treated differently in the workforce, right? Or you potentially go make decisions about people's ability to do certain jobs based upon being vaccinated or not. If you have people who have to work really closely together, one's vaccinated, one's not, do I start to move people around based upon vaccination status? And what basically you need to do is know that as long as there's a medical judgment reason why you're doing it, or in a religious accommodation, you can make decisions around that. You can start to move people based upon vaccination level or not vaccination level, to different roles. But you can't do it if those things don't exist, right? So it's like, I'm going to start treating people differently who are not vaccinated and those who are vaccinated, and starting to reward people potentially different. And so you need to be really careful when it comes to situations like this, making decisions about people's ability to do certain work or not do certain work. There is some litigation ongoing about mandated policies right now, because the federal government put the vaccinations in place, but it's based upon an emergency order. And so there actually is litigation where employers have said, yeah, you have to be mandating that everyone gets a vaccination, and then someone opting out for a reason that wasn't medically related. They weren't in healthcare, and that happened in that particular state. And they didn't have a religious accommodation. They said, you can't force us to do this based upon it only being an emergency order. And so there's a lot of things that need to be sorted out through the legal system that this is drawing on. So it's a unique situation that we're in right now. We talked about this, with webinars we did like a year ago with our clients around a lot of the CARES Act and some of the acts that came out, where usually there's a law that gets determined and then years of litigation, and then it actually goes into effect as that law starts to like form and create shape. And this year's been a year of change. If you're not adapting quickly and moving quickly, and getting the right help to help you in your organization, you might be in a bad place. So that, part of what we always recommend is that you get help. When we look then again at, vaccinated employees, unvaccinated employees, are there differences of the work environment then? So say, a third of your workforce, because about a third of the state of Oregon has been vaccinated, somewhere around there. And you start to have people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated. Does that mean that none of the guidelines from the CDC or OSHA still apply to them. Well, outside of work, yes, the CDC has said, two people who both have been vaccinated can hang out with one another, but without any protection of social distancing or wearing masks. But in the workplace, all of those protective measures, including masks, including social distancing, still apply. And it's important because sometimes people will start to well, I've been vaccinated, I'm out on a job site, I don't need to wear my mask, I don't need to be, I'm rarely going to be in touch with people. The problem is that you're still required as a business owner to be managing to the law, which is social distancing, masks in a in an indoor environment. If you're within 6 feet of one another, wearing masks, all those things still apply. The one difference is that vaccinated employees are not required to quarantine at the same duration that a non-vaccinated employee would be required. So that there is a large benefit when you think about creating stability in your organization, limiting financial exposure or risk of having to have a shutdown, of having employees vaccinated, because that's the biggest upset. If you have a crew and they all get doing an installation of something at a on a job site, and all of them or one person gets COVID because outside of work or inside of work, and now you have to shut down that job site, right? That's the biggest issue that probably affects any business owner: unplanned time off. And COVID is the terror of all terrors towards unplanned time off.
Hey,
And
Eric,
yeah,
there's a question in the chat, which you may have
okay.
seen. I answered it in the chat. However, the specific question was, can you incentivize employees into getting the vaccine by saying that down the road, because masks are still required, but by saying that if you get the vaccine, you don't have to wear a mask. And the point I wanted to make with that, since you answered it, masks, you vaccinated or unvaccinated, you still got to wear them. There may come a time where vaccinated people don't have to wear a mask, unvaccinated people do. That could happen.
Yep.
If it does happen, my encouragement would be to not make a mask like a scarlet letter. So in the way that you encourage staff to get vaccinated, and you kind of dangle the carrot, if possible, about not wearing a mask, I wouldn't turn the mask into kind of that scarlet letter of, oh, these people over here didn't get vaccinated, they're wearing a mask because it's their punishment. I wouldn't turn it into that.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you, Molly. Yes, and I didn't mention this earlier. Please use the question and answer function within the webinar. We will try to address them real time, and Molly and Tim are going to be adding in, or I'll be adding in and trying to answer those. If there are a few slides ahead, we'll wait till we get to that point to answer it. But if it makes sense, we'll interject it and answer it right there. And if it doesn't, it's not part of our presentation, we'll answer those at the end and try to capture everything. And then just the last point I wanted to make on this slide is that if you are a employee who's been vaccinated and you're around someone who tests positive for COVID but is asymptomatic, there is no quarantine required. So that is a big upside for employees to be quarantined, is that you potentially limit that risk of having a site shut down, especially if you're talking about, doing a residential remodel or framing a house, doing an HVAC installation, and you lose a handful of people to having to quarantine. That can be, crushing. So, all right. Anything else we want to add on that, Molly or Tim, before we move to the next slide? Just want to double check. We're good. All right. So, and additionally, if you're, going again from the perception or from the perspective of mandating that everyone is vaccinated, I'm requiring my employees to be vaccinated. If someone has an adverse reaction to being vaccinated, that now potentially becomes a worker compensation claim, right? And yes, worker compensation claims happen. hopefully most of the time you want them to be, work related, not the fact that they went and got a vaccination and now they have an adverse reaction, and being hospitalized is never cheap. And when you hear about some of the adverse reactions to vaccination, it could be simple as people feeling like they have the flu and chills for a day or two, but then Johnson & Johnson vaccination now may be pausing in the US due to a handful of people having blood clots, right? You're talking about, potentially $1 million claims. And that could, put you in a place where you're pretty much can't afford workers' compensation insurance any longer. So it's really an important thing to be thinking about when you're making decisions like this. Also, when you're thinking about this, about paying for vaccinations, it comes into a whole point of, if I'm mandating that employees are vaccinated and they are doing so within their normal working period of time, then I'm going to be paying for them to go get vaccinated, right? So I'm normal working hours, 8 to 5. That's when the clinic's open, Monday through Friday. They go down there. I'll be paying for that because I've mandated them to go to do that vaccination. Additionally, if there's no time available, but then it potentially is on the weekend, that potentially becomes compensable as well. There's, that the best practice is to pay them for that. It may not be necessary, but there are some other, extenuating circumstances that could occur. Tim, did you have a point that you want to make here?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I just wanted to interject that, we deal with this a lot, even prior to COVID with clients. We deal with questions about, drug testing or post-accident things. Do you need to pay for your employee to go to the clinic? And we often have to advise our clients on those issues because we provide work comp. We do some work on pre-screening and accident drug tests. But in this scenario, it's very similar for employers to understand that if you're recommending, mandating the vaccine, that you consider what that means if they need to go on during a work schedule when you're going to pay them, what that means to your workplace. Or, for instance, if you're saying do it on their own time, you're going to be looking at maybe them doing it on a weekend and then potentially incurring, overtime costs as well with that. So it's really about thinking about all the downstream decisions that will be impacted or that you'll need to make prior to doing that. Because, if you have a very small workforce, think about what that means. Larger workforces, there may be more diversity in what they're able to do when they can get that vaccine. And just knowing that, yeah, there will be costs incurred likely.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. And there also is a pending Oregon OSHA regulation that basically says if you're mandating it, not only you're paying for vaccination, but also the travel time and following like normal travel time rules as associated with like non-exempt employees, so hourly paid employees. But that may be coming, and if it's Oregon OSHA who's considering it, usually that becomes a regulation. Oregon, OSHA has made their presence known in the Salem area, some very visible issues when it comes to managing COVID. And so I would probably, if I were a betting man, I'd be betting that becomes a rule.
Hey, Eric, did you see the question about a work comp claim where if somebody gets a vaccine, they have 1, 2, 3 days of symptoms, not feeling well? Is that a work comp claim?
Yeah, so it's a work comp claim if you're mandating the time that they have to be vaccinated. If I don't, and the choice to file a workers' compensation claim is always on the employee's decision to file that claim, right? You as a business owner or leader within that organization want to provide them the pathway to be able to make a claim if they want to. But if you're not mandating it, like we have a required policy that everyone gets vaccinated, then it's not, right? So I'm just choosing not to, but I may have Oregon sick leave and some other laws that come into effect with that. So it's very interesting how all these laws interplay with one another, and it's about thinking about them up front, and then how am I going to respond to each of those as they come into play, right? And so that's, another reason why, just thinking about these wage consideration things, that one, you stay connected with the HBA. So Mike and his team do a great job of informing everyone in the HBA about new rules and regulations that they affect home builders, and or working with someone like BBSI that can help you be even better with your organization. So awesome, great question. All right, so we touched on this a few minutes ago, just about incentives, but that was in a different lens on it. But what about, instead of making a mandatory policy, instead of a mandatory policy, I just highly encourage my team to go get vaccinated. I'm not taking a position that it's mandatory, but I would, love for everyone to be vaccinated. And in fact, if everyone gets, if everyone gets vaccinated, or maybe I'm going to individually reward people, I'm going to give everyone $100, right? And you may have even heard some companies, so large, big box companies, like Walmart, I believe is one of them, that's telling their employees, if you receive the vaccination, provide us the document, we will give you $100. Which is fantastic. That's one way of making that happen in your organization. But there's some things you need to start thinking about when it comes to incentives. One is, how does this affect the pay equity law? So Oregon has a pay equity law that went into place in 2017. Something else that we help our clients with, and we do webinars on as well. But you may have a pay equity issue if you make that incentive very large, right? Because you have people doing the same work, standing next to each other, and you're paying someone differently, giving them a bonus. It's different, right? So you need to be thinking about that. And also, hey, if I'm rewarding people who go get a vaccination, what about those who had a religious belief, or those who had a medical condition which precluded them from being vaccinated? What am I going to do for them? So what we've seen in the past for those is, they'll have, instead of getting vaccinated, maybe they watch a safety course, and then that takes them about an hour, about the same amount of time, no big deal to them, and you reward them for that, right? So those are things to think about, like ways to engage with the team. And then, one of the things so the incentive program is based upon a percent in the workforce. Hey, once we hit 75%, I'm just making a number up right now, right? So we hit 75%, we're going to give everyone $100. That's fine. And that's one of the recommendations that actually BOLI makes. But the problem is with that is that you could end up having people going, all right, one more person needs to get vaccinated. Who are the 3 people who haven't gotten vaccinated yet? I might go pound them right now, go talk to them about why they need to get vaccinated, because I need that $100. And then you end up having a lot of pressure in the organization, starting to create conflict around things that potentially already polarized, right? And we're going to talk about that in perspective a little bit as well. Also, if you have a established wellness program, and you're working with a CPA and have that program set up in your organization where you're recognizing and rewarding employees for wellness behaviors, so it's a way to help reduce some of your medical expenses. You have to be very careful when it comes to rewards attached to wellness activities. So the size of that reward also may be governed by your wellness program, as well as then within a wellness program, there are governances around HIPAA and ADA that apply directly to that, which this then overlaps. So you can see how complicated it gets. And we're talking about things getting complicated. Nothing's more complicated than employee relations issues. So you have a policy of mandating vaccinations. You didn't go down the path of highly recommending employees get vaccinated, but put in a mandated policy. How are employees going to respond to that? We talked just on the last slide briefly about, there might be some polarization or different viewpoints about vaccinations. How's it impact, people who are younger, people who are older, or females or males, right? So there's a lot of different perspectives of that. And you could have a group within your organization that already are actively opposing it or highly encouraging it. And then now you're creating conflict in your organization when you're just trying to do the right thing, right? And this is, our true belief that we hold with all business owners is that they're really wanting to do the right thing. It's just that sometimes how things get implemented lead to greater disruption than intended, right? And that's why, again, we can help a business with things like this. Additionally, you're going to have to track information. It's going to create administrative burdens. The more mandated you are, the higher the administrative work's going to be. Do you have the resources allocated to do that, or not? How are you making sure people get paid for their time? All those things will exist if you're have a mandated policy. And really, if you even think about the EEOC, so they do not actually recommend that you mandate it within your organization. They're in the position or camp, probably much like us, where we highly encourage business owners to have their employees vaccinated as much as possible, as much as the organization is willing to, because it removes risk and helps your organization probably be more profitable down the road. Any questions in the chat? Again, keep those coming along where it makes sense. If we're not touching on something, please ask a question so that we can make sure that it gets addressed.
Yeah, Eric, so there was a question that says that they know that the CDC has changed quarantine guidelines for those that are vaccinated, but the person asking the question is not aware if the OHA has adopted the same CDC guidelines, and they're asking, since we're located in Oregon, do we default to OHA or the CDC?
Yeah, so usually that's a great question. And usually they're in step with one another, where one might come out a day or two behind or in front of one another, but there's a large coordination between government branches, and the OHA, other than some of the county specific things around what can be open or not open, will be lock, stock, and barrel with the CDC on recommendations around quarantining, around social distancing, and all the other physical things that each of us can do to limit the spread of COVID. And so, I would look for county or Oregon specific information as it pertains to how a business can function, because those are left to states to determine. But how people engage with one another is really driven by the CDC, right? So how we might interact as individuals and limiting the spread of COVID is driven by the CDC. How we engage as businesses and what can open based upon what threshold level of infection and hospitalization that is occurring in each county and each state is driven individually. Does that help answer that, Molly? All right, great. All right, so how do I manage a mixed vaccination workplace? Well, first and foremost, that's a weird statement, but you've been doing, some sort of that probably over the last couple months, right? Some people may have been really early in the vaccination process. I know that, the HBA is in the medical space, but my wife happens to work in the medical field. She was vaccinated in January. And then, and as Mike said, everyone will be eligible here shortly for vaccinations. And so you've probably been working across this mixed vaccination workplace for a period of time. And I said, first and foremost, what you need to do is actually think about what you want your organization to look like, how you want people to behave, how you want to ensure that you can support your team and your clients, right? Because your job as a business owner is to make money today and make money tomorrow, right? If you're not thinking about these things ahead of time, then you're gonna be very reactive to unique situations. And so the first and foremost thing is to communicate to employees. So it says maintain great documentation, but that's really around the communication materials, right? So I'm communicating either through an email. I had a tailgate talk. We had a conversation about this. Then I document that we had a tailgate talk, because, first and foremost, you have people who might be in different places than one another, right? You have this workforce that's been out in the field working, and then maybe you have an office environment where people had a hybrid schedule. They have children, they're in and out of the workplace, or maybe they're working remotely the entire time. And now you're starting the process of having this mixed vaccination workplace. You're gonna have people who have very different levels of concern, right? You're gonna have those who are like, hey, this COVID thing isn't a big deal, and those who are scared to death of it because they have a family member, or maybe someone they knew, their uncle or someone related to them, some capacity, had a really bad issue with COVID. And so you're not going to really know what that state of concern is in your organization other than those who vocalize it, right? And one of the most important things to think about is that, how do I create a safe organization where everyone feels that they can come to work and they're not at risk, right? So if I'm working for an employer, whether that has to do with, hey, I'm concerned I'm going to lose my hand while I'm at work, I'm probably not going to work there that long, right? The same thing when it comes to COVID. If I think I'm going to be exposed to COVID and my employer doesn't take it seriously, I might be exposed to that, and my potential family members. There are people who will be concerned about that. And when it comes to safety, the thing that everyone needs to be aware of is that if I'm writing to OSHA about a safety concern because I saw everyone not wearing their masks in the workplace, and I know they're not following those guidelines, that becomes basically what you call like whistleblower activities. People become protected when they make a safety complaint to a business owner or to a government agency. And so you need to be very careful about how if a concern comes to you, how you're going to manage that, what you're going to say and do with that employee, and being thoughtful about, what do I want my organization to look like? What are the rules around it? How am I communicating to my employees? Hey, stay safe, everyone. Please follow guidelines. Making sure that those things exist and that you're talking about them helps you make sure that the rest of the organization is safe, regardless of how you might think about things yourself. First and foremost, how do I protect my business and protect the employees and my customers who I depend on every day? Yes. And if you haven't, and one of the things also to think about, and this came up in just like what the last question is, that if you get a complaint on a requirement and you haven't heard about it before, it doesn't mean it didn't go into effect that morning at 10 o'clock. There was a news release and this is the new rule. And you're like, I didn't know that. And so get help before automatically saying, well, that's dumb. And well, that doesn't apply to us. Get help, go figure it out, right? Call Mike and his team at the HBA, call us, call who your trusted partner is that can help you manage those situations. Because the last thing you want to do is just say, well, that doesn't apply to us, and move on forward without actually doing your research. All right, so the question on the table, and we've talked about this, going from this whole perspective of, hey, everyone needs to be vaccinated, to recommending vaccinations, and you got this mixed work environment. And the bottom line is, can I require employees return to work? And the answer is yes, eventually, as long as it's deemed essential work, I can require people to be in the workplace. But be prepared, like we talked about in the last So I'd be prepared for pushback. And part of it is, not only how people think about and feel about COVID, but also whether or not someone's daycare is open or kids start returning to school and a week after spring break, someone's classroom gets exposed to COVID and the entire classroom or multiple classrooms are shut down. I can talk about my own personal situation. My son is in high school and he's returning to high school in person. May 3rd is the kind of hybrid before then, but they go back full-time in person. And now my days are disrupted because he doesn't have his driver's license and I got to drive him around some of the time. So, you're going to get pushback from your team around returning to full-time back to work. I mean, there's surveys have said that 75% of all employees who have been working remotely want some form of hybrid going forward, right? They want the flexibility that COVID has shown them they can still be productive in the workplace while working remotely. So there's, be prepared for that pushback. And one of the things that, the team talks about regularly, and jump in here, guys, is that, you might have people, if your rules are like, hey, everyone's back in the office 100%, 8 to 5, every day you got to be here. It is a job seekers opportunities exist a lot right now, right? There is a war on talent, and making sure that you're thinking about flexibility as a benefit may go a long ways in retaining your team. Molly, is there something you want to add?
And I'll just echo that a bit, Eric, in that we're finding that for most of our clients, and in several different industries, they're having a harder time than ever hiring new employees. Retention seems to be impacted by this as well, especially if there was any reduction in the amount of work available, or if there was any shutdown during COVID. We see a lowering in retention, but it's been much harder to bring new team members on. And so remaining flexible, the way Eric, kind of pointed out, I think is going to work in your favor over the next year, if that's an option for you as an employer.
Yeah. And, potentially there's an opportunity for you to save money, move to, another location that has less office space. Maybe that's an option for you as a business owner in it too. You had 8 people working in the office. You realized through COVID, actually you need a space that's half the size, and you can have people work remotely, or there's a shared workstation instead of everyone having their own desk, right? All those things are, potential savings for you too. So be thinking about it in that holistic perspective, and that really points to the point that we're trying to make through a lot of this, is that it really takes being thoughtful ahead of time. And what do I want my organization to be? What is the company I own or manage? How are we going to show up every day? And what does it mean to my employees? What's that employee value proposition? How do they appreciate and understand what it is that we do for them? And so, and we think about that, we know there's going to be this balancing act of a complete disparate organization around people who strongly believe about vaccinations, those who don't believe in them at all, in a group in the middle, right? And so we're going to now move into some scenarios where we're going to walk through a couple different situations that we think you're probably going to experience. And so turn it over to Tim. Tim will lead us for the first one, Molly through the second. And again, keep those questions coming. We'll try to make sure that we get to all of them through this presentation.
Okay. Well, thanks, Eric. Yeah, no shortage of scenarios here at BBSI. Sometimes I think we're scenario consultants. The topic is of no importance to us. We'll take any scenario. Send it along. We have heard them all. I'm laughing to myself because one just came to mind. But we have a couple here that we think might be more applicable. Things that, quite frankly, you've probably dealt with prior to COVID, even in some manner. And so they're not so much anecdotal as things that we deal with. I wanted to add just a quick data point to this because I love numbers. And it makes it a little more real for me when I think about, and just a survey that was taken at the beginning of the year. These numbers came from SHRM, which is the Human Resource Management Society. So at the beginning of the year, they surveyed a lot of employees, and they found that of the employees, about 40% of them said they may not or will not get a vaccine if they're available to them. So that's 40% of employees surveyed said may not, will not. Now, further down, 70% of those 40%, this gets a little complicated, said that even if their employer required it, they still wouldn't do it. So what does that mean? That means that you potentially could have a workforce in which 1/4, roughly, even if you mandated a vaccine, would say they don't want to do it. Now, Eric touched on some of the reasons that they could have exceptions to that, but there may just be some that don't want to. And in this scenario that we're talking about, right, we have, this idea that people have different viewpoints, political views. And so in this scenario, you have a population of employees with different political views. And as an employer, you already deal with this. But now, how do you balance somebody's personal, beliefs, political views with it being a safe place to go and work? And it's not easy, right? I mean, Eric talked about, can you mandate? Who can mandate? Would it be smarter to just encourage a vaccine? But one of the things you'll hear throughout this whole thing is that, there's a few steps you can do here, I think, in this scenario is know your population and plan ahead for this, create a communication plan, and then consider actions that you can take beyond that. When I say plan ahead, we're looking at, your population. If you have 20, 50 employees, you already know some of the different viewpoints. So start thinking about those in a proactive way. Think about the different political views they may already have and the viewpoints. And remember too, we think at BBSI, diversity in political views and in opinions is actually healthy for a workforce. So it's a good thing, and you can find a way to celebrate that. I know that may seem hard, but having different views is good for a workforce. But think about that when you're planning ahead. Make decisions and tie everything back if you can to, Eric talked a little bit about what's your show up to work philosophy, but think about I want to make these decisions based on a safe work environment or the well-being of my employees and this business being healthy. We have to have business for these people to be employed and make money. And if you can tie your decisions and your communications back to that as your driving kind of value, it'll make it a lot easier to have that communication to employees. Employees want to go home with the same amount of toes and fingers that they showed up to, and they want a paycheck, right? Those are at the very core of how we operate as managers and employers. Now, beyond that, right, let's think about a communication plan in advance. It can be informal or formal. It can be an email. It can be a staff meeting, hey guys, let's talk about this. These are the things that impact our business. These are the recommendations we're making. Have it in open form where they can comment back and forth and help people understand the different viewpoints. That may get testy, it may not. Maybe it's a drafted communication in advance to share with your team, reiterating that, here's the important things, but we also respect the diversity of opinions here. It's important for people to feel safe and, considering what matters to them the most. And then I would say beyond that communication plan, have the necessary conversations with the employees that you may find may be more concerned. You have an employee who feels like there's no way I'm going to work next to X employee because they don't have the same view and I feel it's unsafe. Have a conversation with that person. Engage on the level of saying, what is it that you're concerned about? Remind them that you're taking all the precautions necessary for CDC guidelines. So all those things are occurring. How can we make this better? And then think about, when you have those conversations, are there ways that you can accommodate them? And I'm not saying ADA accommodation. I'm just saying more so that you may have the type of work where teams work together in different ways. You may have somebody that can work at home a couple days a week. You may have somebody that may just want to take a little time off until the situation changes. These are things that are within your power to make. But again, the message is plan in advance. And then beyond kind of the accommodations or what you can do, I think it's just being open to the constant communication about this. Eric's really great with our small team in that we meet weekly. And one of the first things we talk about is, let's talk about COVID. How do you feel? You feel your families are safe? Do you feel your work environment safe? Let's talk about it. And guess what? We don't all agree. Molly and I never agree. That's why we're in different rooms. But so just consider those things about planning in advance, communication, and I'll kick it to Molly where it's a little more specific, I think, in the scenario of how to deal with some of this.
Thanks, Tim. And we're actually in different rooms, so we can observe CDC guidelines and be safe at work. But yes, HR people love to have back and forth exchanges about what could be and what is. But for this scenario, it's what if I have an employee who refuses to work with others who are not vaccinated? So whether it's now or a time in the near future, this is a question we actually anticipate that we're going to get. Is just like how we had the question all the time of employees saying they didn't feel safe at work, they didn't want to come in, 6 months ago, a year ago. Now we anticipate getting the question of some staff are vaccinated, some aren't, and then you have employees who just can't, don't want to come in unless everyone's vaccinated. So the biggest point of encouragement here is that every interaction you have with an employee is either going to build that relationship and strengthen your company culture, or it's going to deteriorate it. So every time you have those abrasive, maybe ego-driven or emotion-driven or a failure to understand, anytime you have interactions like that, they deteriorate your culture. And unhappy employees are more likely to cost you money, whether it's you have to terminate them and hire someone else, you got to train someone, or they might be more likely to file a complaint, quite frankly. But the more that you can have good interactions with employees, generally that's going to save you money, might even make you money. A happy workforce wants to work for you. An unhappy workforce might not get as much done. Those are the people who might take extra breaks and be on their cell phones and take the work van on a detour, things like that. So if someone comes to you and says, gosh, I don't want to come in or come to the work site until everyone's vaccinated, I would definitely demonstrate empathy and concern. And I would actually take time to sit down with them, whether it's over a computer, a phone, social distance in an office, and ask them why. If their reason is that, they themselves can't get it, maybe their medical provider has said there's an ingredient in there, you're allergic to it, you can't get it. That seems like a valid concern, right? That doesn't seem like an employee who's just trying to be difficult or be that, point of annoyance in your day. So that would be a valid concern. If an employee can't get the vaccine for whatever reason, they don't want to come to work until everyone is. That's something that, would probably go a different way than if you just said, well, sorry, you don't want to, you have to. Imagine how an employee who's like, wait a minute, but I can't get it. I want to get it, but I can't. I don't feel comfortable. My employer doesn't even care. So we encourage you to sit down and ask them why. Now, if an employee, just personally doesn't want to get it, but they want other people to get it so they feel safe, it's a little bit of a different issue. You also have people who maybe they can get it, but they're concerned about potentially passing it to a family member. So these are all things that you want to talk about. And it kind of boils down to if they're afraid or if they can't. It's your chance to reinforce that even vaccinated people have CDC guidelines to follow. We're still following CDC guidelines. So even if everybody in this office here receives the vaccine, once the vaccine is available to everyone, we will still be wearing masks here. We will still be appropriately social distancing and following the CDC guidelines as they update and change. So someone who's unvaccinated hopefully will feel more secure at work knowing that you're following CDC guidelines. Keep in mind, your employees may not know what they all are. They know to wear masks and to sanitize and to, not walk up to someone not wearing a mask. They know that, but they may not know all of the potential guidelines. And that's a time for you to sit down and say, here are all the current CDC guidelines or OHA mandates or guidelines. This is what we're following. Do you still have concerns? And it does boil down to you can likely still make them come in. They may quit or they may refuse to come in and you have to terminate them. But it's something that, sit down and kind of try to figure out what their fear is or what their hang up is, and then try to walk them through, how you care about safety and how you're still maintaining a safe workplace. Because, you know, a lot of us, especially for you builders out there, you were considered essential workers, right? So you were likely still working during the pandemic, maybe not for some weeks in there when we were all wondering if who was an essential business, of course, but you were all working. So if we were working before the vaccine, following protocol, we can still follow protocol now. But the biggest takeaway is every interaction you have with employees is either going to strengthen your culture and, you know, create an employee who wants to work for you, or deteriorate your culture and create, you know, that bad attitude, for lack of a better expression.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Molly. All right, so we want to know if there are any more open questions. So a question just came in, says, what if customers do not want unvaccinated people in their homes? Can we reassign unvaccinated employees to different jobs that don't involve going in customers' homes? Molly or Tim, would you like to take that, or you would like me to take that?
You can go ahead.
All right. So yes, so you can, based upon, you know, first and foremost, you can find out who's vaccinated on your team and then have them go to the, you know, those job sites, right? So part of you doing business, that would be a reason why that you are choosing to change who's working on which job. It's not, there are other reasons why you can't do things, right? Based upon protected class status things like age, race, sex, all those different things like that. But that is one that you can make a decision that I'm sending people to do an HVAC install or go clean carpets in someone's house who happens to be, you know, 78 years of age, who's has a breathing apparatus, right? You're going to want to make sure that you're doing the right thing as a business owner and helping protect them as well, because the last thing you want is bad publicity. There is a thing, such a thing as bad publicity. And when it comes to safety, that would be one of them, right? So you can make a decision to move your staff around based upon that.
And we all know there are news sources in town that will write a negative article about you. We won't name them, but we know who they are.
Awesome. I know that we're coming up right on time here, Mike. There's one more question that just came through. We're going to put up our information about our team real quick. So if you want to know more about BBSI, you can go to our website, www.bbsi.com. There is if you want to see the Salem team specific or Willamette Valley team specific information, there is a /Salem, but you can go to BBSI, get our location set up from there. Here's all of our email addresses. If you email us or you're not sure who to email, or you can reach out to Mike. Mike will get information our way. There is one last question, and then I want to make sure that Mike has ability to close things up as we hit the 1 o'clock mark. And the question was, glad to know we're allowed to ask if someone has been vaccinated. Is there a specific code law that allows this, or is it simply that it's not asking for a medical diagnosis per HIPAA? Yes. So basically, you are not asking for a diagnosis question. And here's the kind of unique situation with that. If you had a on-site, you're like having a vaccination party, like you're a big enough organization and you're able to get a bunch of vaccines and you're going to have everyone vaccinated in your office, the questions that lead up to being vaccinated, those are medical inquiry questions, right? Those are questions about, do you feel good? Do you have an ongoing medical condition that might preclude you from being vaccinated? All those things, those are medical inquiries which are protected. Whether or not you're vaccinated or not vaccinated is not an inquiry into a medical diagnosis. So I hope that helps. Again, I want to thank the HBA, Mike, and everyone who participated today was able to attend. Mike, anything you'd like to say before we close today?
No, I just want to thank all three of you, Eric and Tim and Molly. Great information. I want to thank our other HBA partners around the state for promoting. And we will have the recording of today's webinar posted online probably later today. And so if those of you want to go back and review some of the information, we'll have a recording that's available for you. So once again, I want to thank BBSI. This information we've got here is just reflective of the expertise they can bring and kind of that value add they provide for our members. So excited to partner with them on this. So with that, I'll thank everybody for coming, and we'll close the webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.